All right, so we're looking at 3-2. We want to finish this. We talked about different types of crimes, crimes against people, property, business interest. Contracts and different things with that are going to be coming later in our book. But right now we're just talking about um, a lot of theft and things like that. So crimes against property is where we're going to be starting. This part is where we're going to finish. We already did crimes against people. Just as you're looking at this as a review, homicide. We talked about murder. Talked about malice of forethought. The malice meaning you're intending to do harm. You have malicious intent, harmful intent, evil intent. To get first degree murder, one of these things has to happen. It needs to be a felony, premeditation, torture. Things change. You can plea things down. So there's different levels of this: second degree murder, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, involuntary. So hopefully you have all that down when we went over it. Again, we talked about our tests being vocab heavy because you need to know the terms and know what you're talking about. And when we're missing, excuse me, 8, 7, 8, 9 vocab words, that tells me we're not taking too many notes. So if you can cover these things, I think it'd be helpful. We talked about battery and assault. In a lot of states, they don't recognize or see the difference. They kind of combined them. But battery, for our purposes, is the unlawful touching another person. We have examples there. They're in the book. Assault is the threat of doing that battery. Simple misdemeanor, simple battery, simple assault, misdemeanor charges, smaller. Not that they're not serious, but they're less time, fines, probation types of crimes. Where you get into, aggravated assault, these are a little more serious crimes and activities. Kidnapping, unlawful strain of another, sex offenses. We had 2 different type of rape situations: male forcing a female to intercourse, male having sex with an underage female. There's many more crimes that expanded to now, but that's just what we have in our book. We have statutory rape where a victim is underage. Consent doesn't matter. If you're underage, you can't give consent. We'll talk about capacity and things like that later with contracts. It also deals with underage things. A minor with another minor. If 2 minors engage in sexual activity, it can still be considered rape. Date rape, date acquaintance rape, sex with assault by a friend. If they're under 13, it gets a little more serious. Domestic violence is when spouses, children are being involved, and hate crimes when you have different symbols, writings, words, posts, activities going on with those. And so now we're ending up, and if you're in your book, this is where we start on page 65, crimes against property. And we kind of looked at that website on our Google page about the crime statistics and showing, what crimes are being committed when and how much often in different towns: larceny, theft, burglary, different examples. They have some charts there. We're not going to talk about the charts in your book on 65, 66, but you can look at them if you want. You got to remember this book is probably 12 or 15 years old, so some of these are going to change. Main crimes we want to talk about. First one would be burglary, where we're breaking and entering into the dwelling at night. It used to be at night, and then so lawyers, being crafty, would then figure out a way to say, well, it was during the day, so it can't be burglary. So now it includes daytime, and it doesn't just to say their home. It can include garages, cars, other places. So it doesn't have to be at night, doesn't have to be at home. And so when they're making the intent to commit a felony, and that's why they're at burglary. Now, if you can't prove some of that, then they might go to a different lesser charge. Okay. They have an example on 67. We'll let you read. Maybe take a look at it. Basically, a guy's breaking into a house there. But it might be worth reading. Larceny, on top page 68. The unlawful taking and carrying away of another person's property with the intent to deprive him of property is larceny. And you're saying, what's the difference between that and burglary? Burglary would be with the intent of committing a felony. Larceny is basically a legal word for stealing. And these fines and numbers will change from state to state. And obviously, since we're older these things update and change frequently. Larceny is usually seen as a misdemeanor. When it's a smaller amount, this number could be anywhere up to 1,000 now. Where grand larceny or petty larceny are different. Petty larceny is the misdemeanor. Grand would be over the dollar amount. It would be a felony. Excuse me. Shoplifting is a form of larceny. If it's not written there, it probably should be. Embezzlement, wrongful taking away of another person's that was trusted with that property. This would be like the business interest. We used to do things. We used to watch a Bernie Madoff video. People that would invest money with a certain individual and then they would steal money from others and pay off their investors, keep getting more and more money investing, just Ponzi scheme type things. But when you're in charge of their property and you use it against their wish, that would be embezzlement. We have robbery, taking away of another person's property through threats or violence. You're basically taking it off their person. It says taking from their person, from their body, from close to their body, using violence, threats. They have an example. It says, suppose that Virginia, like in the earlier example, Virginia came into the store point, or the customer came in, pointed a gun at Virginia, demanded money from the register. The act would be considered armed robbery because the robber used a weapon to forcibly take money out of her. Okay. If they just said, "Hey, give me it," it talks about another example. Virginia worked as a cash register to help pay for college. Customer bought groceries, paid with cash. Virginia put the money into her pocket instead of cash register. That act was embezzlement because she entrusted the money before she stole it. That's a small example of embezzlement. That would probably be grand theft or theft, petty theft, depending on what it is now. It probably wouldn't be considered embezzlement. But anyway, arson, willfully malicious burning of a dwelling or another house, and then lawyers got involved, and so it's not just house; it's defined as any kind of burning of a building. Excuse me. The scorching or blackening of a building is not enough to be considered arson. So if it's just blackened, but it didn't go up in flames, so you need to have the flames. Scorching is not enough. But arson is defined as the willful malicious burning of another building or another person's property. Vandalism, willfully or maliciously acting on purpose with evil intent to damage their property. Could be some kind of mischief or criminal damaging, depending on what state you live in and what they kind of call it. Anyone in sports crime and vandalism who happens to be the lookout can also be charged with that crime, even if they're not doing anything, but let's just say they're sitting in the car looking. Shoplifting, form of larceny, act of stealing goods from a store. Okay, and so this is what I was mentioning before. Make sure you know shoplifting is a form of larceny. You're taking goods from another store. Shoplifting costs businesses, customers, millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. They say billions because they have to put into their budgets how much they think will get stolen, and then they have to raise the prices based on that. And the people that are stealing, get free stuff, and the rest of us not stealing have to pay for the extras. They have to pay for the upcharge because they know they're going to get stuff stolen. So anyway, that's a lot of it. If you get to page 70, then we have drag racing. As mentioned, one of the other examples. Some states have outlawed it, or it's a felony to drag race, joyride. Someone would be temporarily taking a motor vehicle without someone's permission. Not just stealing it, but joyriding, taking it around the block, or taking it for 4 or 5 minutes, or whatever the case may be. Anyone who participates in drag racing, joyriding, they can be held liable, not just the driver, which could come into play with civil cases. Who's being charged, who's found guilty, those types of things. Excuse me. There's other crimes that they kind of lump in at the end. Talking about alcohol, drugs, sale of alcohol is always seen, or possession of alcohol, tobacco is always seen as a little less than drugs. The perception and public opinion of marijuana is kind of lessened where marijuana, and depending on what your viewpoint is, but marijuana, tobacco, beer are kind of lumped, getting closer to being lumped together. But whereas cocaine and heroin and all these other hard drugs, right? The things that get people really, 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 really in trouble. I mean, that would be different, seen as harder drugs. But anyway, the sale of drugs is always considered more serious than possession of them. Drugs are always considered more serious for crime than legal substances like alcohol or tobacco. Identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, all those things, social security numbers, asking people for your bank record, anything with that would be a white collar identity theft type crime or a federal crime, a white collar crime, however you want to see it. Those would all be business crimes as well. So that's kind of a nutshell. 3-2, no,